Yeah, so my name is Charlotte, and I work with resilient organisations. For those who haven't heard about us, we're a social enterprise, and we help organisations, groups and communities to become future ready. And so that's what I'm going to focus on today, is how do we build these future ready organisations, and in particular looking at that interface between risk management and this emergent concept of resilience. And actually a lot of what I've got to say today is just echoing what has been said by other presenters, but perhaps packaged in a different way. And hopefully I've got some good stories to go along with my pictures as well. All right, so today we're going to go on a bit of a journey. I'll start with the resilience imperative. So why has this concept of resilience emerged and what does it mean in simple terms? Then some of the basic principles of what our organisation means by organisational resilience. And then most of the time I'm going to talk about some practical strategies for how you can start to integrate some of these resilience concepts into day-to-day business. So chapter 1, expect the unexpected. So this was an actual heading this year in the newspaper, and some of you might have seen it. A weed-laced cake brings business to its knees. So this was a story, actually the event happened in 2001 in a Hawke's Bay pack house where an employee brought a marijuana-laced cake to a shared morning tea. And employees had some of the cake, including a couple of pregnant women, an elderly lady with a heart condition, and I think within about half an hour there were forklift drivers doing wheelies, and the ambulances turned up to take 14 of the staff to hospital. So it's a light-hearted example, but what happened in the months following this event, there was a pack house of about 50 staff. The staff were divided over the prank, and what emerged was an organisation that had a drop in morale and productivity, and the owner described how the business was almost brought to its knees and almost collapsed. So it's an example of how strategic risk can emerge from anywhere. And we heard this earlier today by Lakshmi, that there are risks that are always coming and surprising us. And I just thought I would use this example because how many of us have marijuana-laced cakes on our risk registers? You know, we might have drug policies and things, but these things always slip through the gaps. So, I mean, this is the environment we live in, and again, I'm iterating what other people have presented and said, is we live in an uncertain world. There's all sorts of things changing: nanotechnology, genetic therapy, cloud computing, internet, advanced robotics, knowledge automation. Oh, we just don't know what this world is going to look like, and it's a real challenge for organisations to kind of prepare for that. And not only are all these things advancing, we're also developing into this world where we have these complex interdependent systems, and so all these systems might be okay in their own right, but then as you start to join them together, we see those gaps emerging in those real risk areas. And the challenge is also that us as organisations and individuals have become increasingly specialised in our knowledge, and so tackling these wicked complex problems that emerge are extremely challenging. So this is where resilience comes into it. Resilience is trying to create a glue that holds the pack of cards together. It's a little bit of an insurance policy for that when things do go wrong, you can help to manage them more effectively. But it also, in doing so, as you'll see through my presentation, is we are building that risk culture that's been so prevalent in today's presentations, and helping us to manage the risks that we do know about more effectively as well. So chapter 2, be ready to adapt. The key question, what would MacGyver do? Well, he would have duct tape and a Swiss Army knife. But what as organisations we need to be able to do is we need to have the skills and capability that allow us to adapt to those situations that we just can't see coming. We need skills and capability to be agile, innovative, efficient and effective in a quickly changing world. What does that mean? Well, our organisation's been around since about 2004, started as a research group, and we've done a series of research and developed models around what we think contributes to organisational resilience. And all the analysis work we've done, it comes down to two components: planned and adaptive. So planned is really about your standard risk management practices, business continuity processes, and all those those embedded processes that we have in our organisations. But then there's also this other element, this adaptive component, which is, as I mentioned before, these skills and capabilities and culture that helps to reduce risks pre-event, but also helps us respond post-event when that marijuana cake incident comes along. And this graph is perhaps a bit misleading for the scientists in the room, because I don't believe they're totally independent factors as well. You can have adaptive planning, and you can plan to be adaptive as well. So that's where I'm going to focus today, is that intersection between those planned processes that are standard amongst risk management and those adaptive processes. But before we get on to those practical strategies, I'll just run through what we use as a model for organisational resilience. And really this model has been created as a tool for us to be able to measure organisational resilience, to help organisations identify their strengths and weaknesses, but also as a communication tool. Because often we chuck around this word resilience, and it means a lot of different things to different people, and it can be often very intangible, and you don't get much traction if you can't actually see or measure what you're doing. So that's the aim behind this this model. So there's 3 attributes in the model. At the top in the blue box you'll see leadership and culture. So that's, I think, this risk culture that everyone's been talking about. It's about how well the organisation is led and the leaders leading by example. It's about how well engaged the staff are and how aware both the staff and the leaders are of emerging trends. It's about how quickly decisions can be made, and particularly in situations where you have a limited information available. And it's the innovation and creativity that's encouraged in the organisation to help respond to these changing environments in a timely way. There's networks and relationships, and this talks about how people engage within an organisation. So we heard silos mentioned earlier today, and so it's about avoiding those silos or managing those silos within organisations so that you have effective flow of information both up and down and through departments, but also looking outside your organisation, remembering that no organisation is an island and you're connected to all sorts of people in your industry, customers, competitors, communities, whatever your organisation is. And then that last attribute there is change ready. It's about being on your toes and being ready to adapt. It's about practicing responding to crises, so proactive posture and stress testing those plans that you have. It's actually doing the planning as well, and it's making sure you have a clear unity of purpose. And I'll use the term strategy, as has been used by other presenters, so that you know that when a crisis happens, or as you're planning for crises to happen, you have a really clear path of where your organisation wants to head. Okay, enough talk. Action. What does this mean? How can we do this in practice? So I'm going to run through a few ideas for how you could integrate resilience principles into the risk management practices. There's many, many more. So, to use Rupert's phrase, keep your finger on the pulse. So this is about situational awareness and understanding what's going on. But I'm trying to present an idea which changes the way that you look at risk, and not just from a desktop exercise, but to start to make this risk management and risk awareness an organisational cultural aspect. And so that we have, as Amy and Teresa talked about, we have 500 risk managers, not just 5 risk managers. So it's about making the most of all the eyes and ears that you have available to you. So as a graduate engineer, one of the jobs I got given for 1 week a month was to read the newspaper. My task was to identify any articles that related to our business or could impact our business. And so I'd duly do this job. I thought it was a great job, give 30 minutes to read the newspaper in the morning as part of my workday. And I'd circle the articles, and then I would go and report back and talk to my manager about what I saw. And I would be looking for things like changes in the industry, competitors, customers, scientific advancements, anything I thought was related. And in hindsight, this was a really great activity for helping raise my risk awareness, because I started to understand, just as a graduate, I understood where my organisation sat within the community, within my industry. I started to be aware of what could affect our organisation, and perhaps most importantly, I then had a mandate to talk to my manager about those risks. And I think exercises like this, and there will be other ways to do it as well, is about creating that risk culture and making sure that everyone in the organisation is aware of what's going on, and how how the organisation is placed to manage risks. And again, it's not just about inside your organisation, it's about linking outside your organisation as well, working with business partners, competitors, customers, industry groups, anyone else that can help you to become aware of what risks are emerging on that business landscape. And this can be one of the best forms of risk mitigation as well, because grapevines are great for finding out what's happening in the world and then bringing the news back to you. And it's also developing a shared risk awareness so that you're in this together with your business partners and your competitors and your customers, and that no one's alone in this complex world. And of course, it's not all about identifying the negative risks, remembering that risk is the positive or negative deviation from expected outcomes. So we've got to remember that we're looking for opportunities as well. And if we're really well linked into our organisation and also outside of our organisation, it'll enable us to better identify the opportunities as well. So that's all about keeping your finger on the pulse. So chapter 4. Plan for the unknown. Sounds like a bit of an oxymoron. Perhaps some people might think it's a bit impossible, but there are growing techniques around planning for the unknown because it is becoming increasingly apparent that we can't predict everything. So one of the techniques is to look at planning around focusing on the impact. So what sort of impacts might our organisation experience? So disregarding for the time being where that source of impact might have come from. And as an example, here's reputation damage, which is often one of the highest risks identified by businesses. And this could come from all sorts of different sources: employee disaffection, security breaches, organisational change, technology change, quality issues, and many, many more areas. Now, we could plan for all those different events to happen, or we could start to think about, well, how do we prepare our organisation for an event that might cause reputational damage? Well, what can we do to mitigate any impact to our reputational damage? So I think this is a great tool because the impacts that happen on an organisation are often finite, but the events that could cause those impacts are infinite. I think this is a great planning tool, but I would caution the use of this in anything other than planning. It's not a great communication tool. I think if you're trying to talk to your executive team or your board, I think using scenarios is a much better approach because it's much more tangible, but a planning tool nonetheless. Another strategy that's emerging is multiple futures. Some of you may have seen some of these approaches. Auckland Council did a multiple future strategy earlier in the year, and that was released. But this is something that can be really done effectively with organisations. And I'm going to run through a quick example here of how this might be used. So I'm taking a fictional organisation, an organisation that has developed a technology that is related to climate change. So for this organisation, the two biggest environmental factors that might affect their organisation would be the pace of climate change, because that'll affect the demand they have for their services, and the pace of technology change, because that impacts how relevant their technology is and whether or not they need to do research and development. So you would create a matrix around these, looking at the various combinations of a high pace of climate change versus low climate change versus high pace of technology change and low pace of technology change. So when you have a high pace of climate change but low technology change, for this organisation, it's kind of a nirvana situation. It means there's little need to develop their technology and possibly less competition, but there's going to be a high pace of climate change, so they're going to be in high demand. The next one would be if you have that high demand for your services through the high pace of climate change, but then you've got a high pace of technology change, so you're needing to do R&D. So that would be sort of a fast-paced environment, and so on and so forth. You create these futures, and it creates a wide range of futures that your organisation might have to deal with. And then you look at each of the futures and you say, well, what skills, capabilities, resources, plans do we need to have be effective across all these futures? And it may seem, if you do this exercise, it's actually quite powerful to see the common things that come across those futures as well. And it could be a tool that you would use to assess different decisions you are making as well. Which decision is most robust against these wide futures ahead of you. There's other emerging techniques. This is one which is in the research sector at the moment, so adaptive policy pathways. Some government agencies are starting to use it as well. This is about understanding that we don't have all the information we need to make the best decisions. Often decision makers want to hold out until they have all the information. But when we're dealing with these wicked problems, and climate change is one of them, the information's changing all the time, but if we wait till the information stops changing, it's going to be too late. So this technique enables decision makers to make decisions and then look ahead and say, well, we'll have a decision point. In 5 years' time, we'll reassess this decision and we'll see, are we still on the right path or do we need to change paths? And this is a bit of an empowering tool, really, because it makes decision makers realise that what they decide now is not final, and it's now enabling them to adapt into the future. So those are just a few examples of how you could start to plan for the unknown. Chapter 5, Act for Today and Tomorrow. Now, we've heard a bit about this today around making sure that risk plans and strategies are aligned with the strategy of an organisation. So I think it's always important to really frame our risks against the whole of the organisation's objectives, both now and into the future, and looking at all risks. What you often see in organisations is a little bit of a myopic view of risk. And sometimes this can be based on political views, it could be availability bias. Perhaps an organisation has just experienced a crisis and that becomes the thing that people want to focus on at the time. But I really encourage for risk to always be framed in that holistic framework. I'll give an example of an organisation we worked with recently who was in Christchurch and got a large insurance payout to repair their large portfolio of buildings. And their immediate reaction was to do the best they could and remediate everything to the best building code. And this was slightly influenced by the new Health and Safety Act as well, and the increased responsibility of board members. And they quickly realised that they just didn't have the resources to do that. And so we worked with them to help them develop a prioritisation process that looked not just at those risks that were front of mind, but all the other hazards they had to deal with over time, and also their day-to-day, how effective their business was running day-to-day, and were there things we could do in this building prioritisation process where we could help them to run more efficiently day-to-day. So it was really about creating that holistic picture for them to help them navigate this complex decision process. This particular organisation also had risks if they didn't provide their services. So, you know, they were doing a disservice to themselves by looking at only the life safety risks of those seismic hazards. And part of this, as I mentioned before, is about linking to that strategic plan of that organisation. Okay, last practical example. Chapter 6, practice, practice, practice. Now, emergency exercises are often left to the realm of emergency management personnel and business continuity planning teams. But I would encourage people to also extend this to management of strategic risks. Because when a crisis happens, the skills and capabilities needed to manage a crisis are different from day to day. And you need to be able to practice those skills. And executive teams, boards, etc. need to have those skills ready and available when those crises come. So the University of Canterbury had an emergency management team who had set out some really great plans for managing various emergencies across their campus. But they just weren't getting any buy-in from the executive. So they decided to run a drill. They ran an active shooter drill on campus, and they had actors acting out as victims, and they invited the executive team along, and as part of the exercise they had a media storm. They had helicopters flying overhead, beaming live images to the world of this active shooter, and all of a sudden they got it. They realised that what they were seeing as operational management issues soon became strategic risks, and this would affect their reputation across the world and their ability to attract students and to remain financially viable. So using scenarios like this, and in particular practical exercise, are really a great way of capturing the hearts and minds of the executive team, and as well as helping them to practice the skills, the crisis management skills that they will need when those events happen. And I say when because I do believe that we can't predict everything that's going to happen. So today I've talked about 6 principles for integrating resilience principles into your risk management practices. Expect the unexpected. It's a little bit of a cathartic letting go of saying, well, we can't see everything, so we know there's going to be some things out there we can't see. And how do we deal with that? We've got to be ready to adapt. So practice those skills and develop those skills and capabilities. We've got to keep our finger on the pulse. And that's not just the risk managers, that's everyone in the organisation. Starting to plan for the unknown, so thinking about our planning strategies and how we can integrate some of this planning for the unknown, making sure that we align our risk management practices with our strategic goals for the organisation, and lastly, practicing. So before I finish, I'd just like to acknowledge that this presentation and all the ideas and things that have come from this organisation, presentation, from a team. I'm representing a whole team of people, and I'm drawing ideas from the 15 plus years of research and consulting work we've done, and not only our organisation but all the networks that we connect to as well. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope I've inspired you maybe to take a fresh look at how you manage risks in your organisations and some ideas.